Welcome to Chautauqua People. Our guest today is Mary Bailey, who comes from a multi-generational Chautauqua family of artists. Her great-grandfather developed an arts program in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, served as director of the Cleveland Institute of Art from 1917 to 1930, and started the arts education at the institution, and he conceived the Arts Quad design. Her father served on the institution board of trustees. An active artist herself, Mary has taught sculpture. She's had 10 featured or soloed shows, including Flowers in 2014, which displayed in the Stroll Gallery on the grounds. Her resume shows 15 group exhibitions and numerous video screenings, articles, and reviews. Mary did her undergraduate work at Brown and received a Master of Fine Arts degree in writing from Vermont College of Fine Arts. Mary, how did your family make its way to Chautauqua?
Well, my great-grandfather, Henry Turner Bailey, was born in North Scituate, Massachusetts, and he started teaching public school teachers how to teach art. And then he founded the School Arts magazine in 1903, which he edited for 17 years, and that must have put him on Chautauqua's radar, because in 1906 he came to Chautauqua to help start the Chautauqua Art Summer School program and design the Arts Quad with the architectural firm from Buffalo. So that was my family's first entrance into Chautauqua 4 generations ago.
He made some enormous contributions. Do you have any idea deeply where his interest originated in art?
There's a few family photos of work that he did when he was a young child, and he was a master of drawing from the youngest age. And he was a very religious man, but his whole ethos was about beauty and nature and finding beauty in everything in the world, in the natural world, beauty in the way people comported themselves. So that really was his religion, and he just had natural artistic drawing talent too. So I think it just was the way he was, the way he was born.
Now, when we talked, you have a very rich family history.
Mm-hmm.
Know what people are doing. How is all of that recorded?
Well, you know, it's not really that well recorded, but I owe a great debt to my aunt, Jean Bailey Gady, who wrote a short biography of Henry Turner Bailey, which I have right here.
Can we see it?
Yes, sure. It's called Yankee Convictions. And it's a short history with lots of great photographs of his drawings and family and history of what he's done at Chautauqua. But he also, the interesting thing about Henry Turner Bailey, who the family calls HTB, is he was a visual artist. He was an educator. He was a writer. He was an architect. He was a lecturer. He was really a Renaissance man and could do everything. And you know, I'm his great-granddaughter, and I know many people, my second cousins, first cousins, we all are very inspired by him. Many of my cousins are visual artists or writers or musicians. So you can't help but think it's a little bit in the genes, you know.
Indeed. Indeed. Now let's go back to the Arts Quad. Where did you get the inspiration for that remarkable place?
Well, the interesting thing, his story is a wonderful story in that he married his high school sweetheart, but only after 7 years. It took 7 years to build. He designed and built a house in North Scituate, Massachusetts called Trustworth. And that house was designed with the same philosophy as the Arts Quad, in that it was conceived as a 3-sided structure that was open on one side, exactly like the Arts Quad. Now, he built 2 wings of the house in Massachusetts. So I think you're the one that pointed out that it was his Jefferson form. So you actually know more about that than I do.
And Thomas Jefferson used the term academical quadrangles, and the notion was they were supposed to have a focus. And I walked through, after reading about Jefferson's work there, walked through the quadrangle. I thought, my goodness, this is a textbook situation.
Well, there's no notation of that. I know Av Posner, the historian, wrote a paper on the design and construction of the Arts Quad at Chautauqua. I don't know if he must have identified that, but it's not in any of Henry Turner Bailey's writing that was his source of inspiration. But
And he may have come upon it independently.
Yeah.
So that's significant. So indeed, I understand at least some members of your family have been great lecturers. Is that the same gentleman?
Yes, that's him. He steals all the limelight. He wrote many books on beauty. He talked and lectured about beauty, about photography, architecture in Egypt. I mean, he was just so well known. But I have a quote here. He wrote something called the Beauty Lover's Creed, and this is something he was well known for, and I just quote a little bit of it here. I believe in looking for beauty everywhere, watching for it, searching for it in the great and the small, in the unusual and in the commonplace things of this wonderful world. So he especially loved trees. He wrote a marvelous book called Tree Folk, where he drew all the trees around his house in Massachusetts and named them all. There was a wonderful one called Queen Victoria, which is a great old knobby pine, with all of the limbs sort of fall, not much greenery left on the tree. He wrote a fantastic memoir called Yankee Notions, which has his personal philosophy in life. But he wasn't an egotist at all. He believed in with a fervent belief in introducing everyone to the wonders of the natural world and how to recognize beauty in life. And he felt that was what gave life meaning and lifted us up from our suffering, So and I think that's true for us today as we go through some of the difficult times with COVID. How many people went out, walk, and found relief and meaning in nature, and comfort. So he was a man of his times and ahead of his times there.
That's magnificent to have that kind of legacy. Do you have any pictures or demonstrations of sketches of family history we could look at?
Sure. Yes.
Let's see what we got.
There's first one is a portrait of a photograph of Henry Turner Bailey, and they called him in the Cleveland School of Art. They called him the cheerful dean. He wasn't. He was a very friendly guy. He wasn't a tough taskmaster at all. So this, I think, is a great photo of him. And then I have another photo of him that he drew. This is just a scene from Ravenna. His real talent was as a draftsman, which is why he was head of drawing, supervisor of drawing in the state of Massachusetts for 17 years. And he traveled to every town and city and village and visited all the schools to help implement the arts education program in Massachusetts.
So that was done in Massachusetts, that drawing. And was that a fine pen, or what was his medium?
I think it was just graphite, and that was done during his travels. He did that drawing in Ravenna during his travels. He lectured all over Europe. I have a note here. He led trips to Europe from 1903 to 1928, lecturing and showing people the wonders of the ancient world in Egypt and in Europe. So,
Has that family interest in travel continued for multiple generations?
Yes. My parents, I think, when my father, Jack Bailey or John Bailey, added it up, I think he came up with 70 countries.
Wow.
that he and my mother, Kay Bailey, visited over the years, after they retired mostly. But
How about yourself?
we've done quite a bit of traveling. I've been to bicycle trips in Greece and through France and Italy with my husband, and we've been to Costa Rica. I took a trip with Costa Rica with my parents. Recently I've been to Scotland quite a bit because my father-in-law lived there for 35 years. So I'd like to do more than I've done, but the interest in traveling. And I think, the biggest influence is the interest in the arts. I grew up surrounded by paintings. My house that I grew up in had a huge library, and my father just said, read anything you want. And I grew up in a very colorful house, so art was at my, it was demonstrated. And also, I have to say, Chautauqua nurtured my my artistic bent in that I took courses or classes at the Art Squad for years, because before the summer school started that brought in, college students and graduate school students, all of the art courses there were for the community. And it was a great place to go as a kid on a Saturday morning, and I took classes with Remington Arthur, who was one of the people who ran the program. And I took classes there throughout my childhood, not knowing that my great-grandfather designed it.
Wow.
For some reason, my dad didn't tell me.
What a story later on.
Yeah.
Can we see some more of your work?
Sure. Let's see. Oh, I just wanted to include this one. This is a drawing. This shows my Henry Turner Bailey's sense of humor and creativity in that how he interpreted a stand of willows.
Can you read through that? Some folks may
Yeah,
not see it on screen.
it's a diagram of growth of a group of willows on Cape Cod cooperating to maintain the family tradition of shape. And then he has this wonderful calligraphy, and then he has this funny illustration of a group of people holding the umbrellas. So he saw as more than was there, and he was a master at making connections and bringing the world alive. And that's why people loved him so much.
That's great.
I read one year he gave 400 lectures, in addition to all of his other, work.
Could he still talk at the end of the year?
I wish I had his energy.
Let's see some more.
Okay. So I started, well, actually, I should say I worked, my first job was working at the Chautauqua Daily as a writer. So I worked there for 4 years, and I also had the interest in art. So my whole life has been characterized by an interest in the visual art and writing. But when I got to college and took my first painting course where I went to Brown, not an art school, the first assignment in the painting course, the upper level painting course, was to build a 5x5 foot wooden stretcher for painting. And so we immediately went to the sculpture studio. I learned how to use a table saw, bandsaw, and I was hooked. I didn't paint on another canvas for the rest of the semester. All my paintings were built, and then the next semester I was down in the sculpture studio. And that really was where I found my creative voice, and I became a sculptor. So the writing came back a little bit later.
So what is this?
This is a piece. This is a piece from my first series that I made in 1988. It was called Wildlife. So once again, you have the connection between, Henry Turner Bailey's love of nature and, it's come up in me in all my work. But that's called Deadly Nightshade, and it's sort of a combination of a plant and maybe a man-made object. I was interested in making pieces that had never existed before, and inventing new shapes and personalities.
So where is that piece now?
I sold that in a show in Miami, Florida, and I'm not sure where it is. That's what happens. The best pieces always sell.
Great.
So, you know, you have to. If they didn't, you'd get a barn full of work, and then, you know, then you'd be in trouble. So, especially with sculpture.
Great. What else we got here?
This is from another series of a few years later. I do work that's both painted. These are poplar, mostly poplar, painted with acrylic. I also have done a lot of work that's unpainted. But this is a series of, I was trying to make up new aquatic animals, like invent. So I would start with a head, a body, and a tail. I just started making, all of my work is inspired by drawing, but I was first started making models, but then I wanted to try to draw in 3 dimensions. So this is one of my favorites from that series called The One That Got Away. So it's a trophy. All the fishermen at Chautauqua Lake would appreciate this. It's the one that you described that you almost caught, but nobody believes you because you didn't land it. So that was the one that got away.
Great.
Yeah.
Let's see what else.
I've also done a lot of series of work with light in it. So this is a wall relief piece called Wall-Eyed, and there are 2 incandescent bulbs behind the center circles, and then there are layers of wood supported at different heights by posts, and those are casting the shadows out in the wall. So I did 3 of these and made editions for the Parasol Press in New York. So those are all out there somewhere. But this is the artist original, which I still have hanging on my living room wall in where I live in Connecticut.
That's great. That's great. Let's see what else we've got here.
I mentioned that drawing is an important part of the process, and so this is just one of the preparatory drawings I did for a series of pieces that were flowers. And these are the pieces that were included in the Bacci show in 2014. So if you look at the drawing in the lower right-hand corner, that was the drawing that inspired the next slide that I have prepared. And this piece is called Bouquet.
Wow.
And that's about 2 feet tall, and it's mostly basswood, and the base is made out of maple, just for the weight, and I did not use a lathe. That's what everyone asked. Did you lose? Everything is done by hand. Well, belt sander, bandsaw, and then the detail work is usually with a Fordham flexible shaft, which is like a giant dentist tool, or files, you know.
So we would see that base, we say, oh, you turned that on a lathe, but you say no.
No, I made that. I like things to be irregular, off. You know, nothing in nature is perfect. So I find if you add a little bit of a lopsidedness to something, it really brings it alive. It makes it seem more like a living thing.
So was your goal to make a perfectly circular bowl and live with the human frailties that didn't quite come out?
Yeah, no. Well, you know, the Oriental carpets, there's always a flaw. If you look carefully, there's always a flaw in the weave, because the only thing that's perfect is God. So human beings, I always like that thought. You know, human beings are not perfect, and so we need to acknowledge that in our minds and our hearts and our existence. A little humility goes a long way, I guess.
I never realized that about Oriental carpets.
Yeah. I don't know where I picked up that fact.
What else we got here?
Well, the last slide I'm showing you is this is a letter. In preparing for this interview, I reviewed the Yankee Convictions book that my aunt wrote, and I discovered this letter, which I had not read before, that my great-grandfather had written to a daughter of a friend of his, and this is what it says. And this is I have my work has been inspired by exactly this idea that I had not read until 3 days ago. So the
Wow.
fact, yeah. So I just was. So it says, you see that drawing of a flower there? It says, I'm saying thank you with flowers, or rather with one flower, a flower that never bloomed before, that will never wilt or fade, and that is different from every other flower on the face of the earth. So that's what I always thought about my work, is I wanted to make something, the special thing about art is that you can make something that never existed before, whether it's writing, visual art, music, and it's that process of discovery which I think artists are so addicted to. And even though creativity is very difficult, you go down a lot of dead ends. There's a lot of pile of wood on the floor in my studio of things that didn't work out, which then I might put into a piece 10 years later. But it's that process of discovery and surprise that keeps most artists I know working at their craft.
Now, you require to do that kind of sculpture some very significant manual skills, so things aren't just an accident. How did you develop them? How long did it take?
Well, it's interesting. I seem to always have them. I remember in like first grade art class, we had to make a sort of a mug, and it was me and one other girl. Our mugs stood up. Our mugs held together. Our mugs looked like mugs, and I think they had faces on them or something. And I couldn't believe other people just had trouble, putting clay together in a lump. I mean, I taught sculpture at Fairfield University for 3 years, and it was amazing to me to see how some people just had a natural understanding of 3 dimensions, and other people just could not. No matter how much I work with them, they could not visualize anything in 3 dimensions, or even carve a square into a circle, or into a sphere. So. I always was busy with my hands, and I come from a family on my mother's side grew up in Pittsburgh, and they were sign painters and dressmakers and hat makers, and so there's a lot of craft on both sides of my family. So I have it in spades.
So that came along significantly. Now, you've had numerous exhibits and shows. How do you decide what pieces to submit?
Well, most of the time, a gallery will come to you and a curator will select work for a show. If it's a one-person show, and you can pretty much, and you get carte blanche from a gallery, you create a body of work for that show. So, that's it. Just depends on what. Like the show at Chautauqua, that was Judy Berry, the curator there. She was curating a show called Flowers, but nothing was straight ahead. Everybody was coming at the subject matter from a unique and surprising perspective. So it was a very exciting show. So it just so happened that I had made work along those lines, and so she said, make more. So I went back to the studio and I made about 3 or 4 more pieces. So they were first shown at the Vacci Gallery.
How long does it take you to make a piece like that?
Forever.
Okay.
It takes a really long time. That's one of the reasons I switched to writing, is because sculpture, I have a bumper sticker that I put on the inside of my toolbox in my mid-20s that says, "Sculptures do it the hard way." And it really, when you deliver work to a show, the sculptors have the van, we've wrapped everything in bubble pack, we have to take it apart, assemble it, and the painters waltz in. They lean their piece against the wall. See ya. So it's a lot. Being a sculptor, it's a lot of work. It's harder to sell sculpture unless it's outdoors, because people don't have room for it in the house. All the wall pieces I've made that have lights in them. I've sold every one of those that I've made.
And where do you normally sell them?
Well, let's see. I'm a member of the Sculptors Guild in New York, so there's shows there. I'm a member of the Silvermine Guild Art Center, where I've had work, a couple of shows, and sold work there. I've had work commissioned. That's a tough question, you know. It's just wherever you can, wherever it just the serendipity happens to come together. Somebody walks in and sees your work. I mean, I had a piece in the show in New York back in the 80s where I was showing with some pretty well-known New York City artists, and the gallery director told me that somebody was interested in buying my piece, but I wasn't famous enough at the time. So it's a crazy world. The visual art world and the commercial side of the visual art world is very unpredictable.
Indeed. I always like to end with one question, and it's sort of the educator coming through. Suppose a young Chautauquan comes to you, expresses an interest in having a career in art, seeking advice. What would be your counsel?
Well, that's a good question. I would say you have to be thick-skinned, but you have to be very stubborn and pursue your ideas. You have to. When I taught sculpture, that was one of the things that I talked to my students about, is that, you know, if you have an idea, and this is true for writing and I think any art form, if you have an idea, there's a little voice in your head that's going to say, that's a stupid idea. Oh, you're never going to be able to do this. You're not an artist. But you have to tell that guy to be quiet. And the most unusual idea you have, the idea that, you know, comes up one morning, you think, well, that'll never work. That's where the energy is. That's where the freshness is. So I would tell people to go for it and to study art. You know, finding your voice is a very interesting part of being an artist. Read about artists, look at art magazines, take classes, you know, go to school, go to art school, go to graduate school if you want to teach. That's a lot of my friends who are artists are full-time professors, and that's how they make a living. But I think that right before my father died, we were sitting on the porch, and somebody was asking me about my artistic career, and I explained, well, when I went to college, I thought I was going to become a biology major, and I was very interested in genetic engineering, but the sculpture studio, grabbed me by the heart, and I just never left. And my father, who was always very more supportive of, when I became an artist, he was sort of horrified, actually, because, you know, he didn't see a sort of a strong future for me, or maybe was afraid that I would fail or something. But anyway, he said, I'm glad you did. I'm glad you made that choice to pursue art. And so finally, you know, when he was 92 years old, he validates my choice. I grew up in a household where you didn't get a lot of praise from the parents. It would go to my head.
That's great.
So, yeah.
That's great. We are out of time, and this has been great fun. And I hope you'll come back sometime, do another show or two, and let's talk about it.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you so very much.
It's been a lot of fun.
You bet.
Thank you for having me.
You bet.